Good evening, and welcome to our latest political and economic update. Just minutes ago, news broke that has sent shockwaves through global markets. The European Union has slapped a 30% tariff on US goods in a bold retaliatory move, and former President Donald Trump is, to put it mildly, not happy. Markets are in chaos, stocks are tumbling, and the specter of a full-blown trade war is looming larger than ever. Tonight, we're peeling back the layers of this escalating crisis, unpacking why the EU is hitting back, how Trump's reacting, and what this means for American consumers, businesses, and the global economy. Buckle up, because this is a story of high stakes, big money, and even bigger consequences. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications to stay ahead of the curve with our latest updates. Let's start with the bombshell. The EU's decision to impose 30% tariffs on US goods comes as a direct response to Trump's aggressive trade policies, particularly his announcement of 30% tariffs on EU imports, set to take effect on August 1, 2025. Trump took to Truth Social, his go-to platform, to vent his frustration, calling the EU's move unacceptable and a disruption to transatlantic trade. He's doubled down, warning that any further EU retaliation could see the US slap even higher tariffs, potentially escalating to 50% or more. This tit-for-tat tariff battle is no small skirmish. It's threatening to upend a trade relationship worth $1.5 trillion annually, roughly 30% of global trade. The EU, led by figures like French President Emmanuel Macron and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, is signaling it's ready to dig in for a fight, and the markets are feeling the heat. So, why is this happening now? To understand, we need to rewind to Trump's trade strategy since taking office. From day one, he's made tariffs a cornerstone of his economic playbook, arguing they protect American jobs and address trade imbalances. In April 2025, he unveiled sweeping tariffs ranging from 20% to 50% on global imports, including a 25% levy on steel and aluminum from the EU. He's justified these moves by pointing to the US's trade deficit with the EU, which stood at $161 billion for goods in 2023, though the EU counters that its $107 billion deficit in services trade narrows the gap. Trump's rhetoric has been fiery, claiming the EU was formed to screw America and vowing to stop it immediately. His latest move, the 30% tariff on EU goods announced last week, was meant to pressure Brussels into concessions. Instead, it's triggered a fierce counterpunch. The EU's 30% tariffs on US goods, announced just hours ago, target key American exports like steel, aluminum, cars, and agricultural products. Macron has called these reciprocal measures, emphasizing that Europe must not be weak in the face of Trump's policies. The EU's strategy is twofold: protect its economic interests and bring the US to the negotiating table. European leaders are pushing for a zero-to-zero tariff agreement on industrial goods and cars, but Trump's demands for financial reparations and $350 billion in US energy purchases have stalled talks. The EU's not alone. China recently raised tariffs on US goods to 125%, and Canada has imposed 25% duties on American imports. This global pushback is turning Trump's tariff offensive into a multi-front trade war. Let's talk markets, because the fallout is immediate and brutal. When the EU's tariff announcement hit, Wall Street went into a tailspin. The Dow Jones Industrial Average plummeted 1,200 points, a 3.5% drop, while the S&P 500 and Nasdaq fell 4.1% and 4.8%, respectively, within hours. European markets weren't spared either. The Stoxx 600 index slid 3.2%, with German automakers like Volkswagen and BMW taking the hardest hits, down 6% and 7%. The reason? The EU's tariffs hit American industries hard, but they also threaten European exporters who rely on the US market. The Transatlantic Trade Partnership, which accounts for $975.9 billion in goods annually, is teetering on the edge. Investment banks are now warning of a prolonged and deeper economic slowdown across Europe, with some predicting the European Central Bank may be forced to cut interest rates to cushion the blow American consumers are about to feel the pinch. The EU's tariffs will make US goods like bourbon whiskey, cars, and agricultural products pricier in Europe, but the ripple effects don't stop there. If Trump's 30% tariffs on EU goods go through on August 1st, Americans could face higher prices for everything from French cheese and Italian leather to German electronics and Spanish pharmaceuticals. Take cars, for example. A 27.5% tariff on EU auto exports is already in place, and the new 30% blanket tariff would stack on top, potentially raising the price of a $50,000 BMW by $13,750. Agricultural goods are another sore spot. American farmers, already reeling from low commodity prices, now face a 30% tariff wall in Europe, their second-largest export market. Soybeans, corn, and pork could see demand collapse, with prices already dipping 5% in futures markets today. The EU's countermeasures are strategic and surgical. Brussels has drawn up a list targeting $84 billion worth of US goods, including aircraft, cars, car parts, and agricultural products. Bourbon whiskey, a $700 million export for the US, is on the hit list, despite lobbying from France and Ireland to spare the drinks sector. Italy's Foreign Minister Antonio Tajani confirmed the EU's ready to pull the trigger on these tariffs if no deal is reached by August 1st. This list is a step up from an earlier plan to hit $24.5 billion in US goods, showing the EU's willingness to escalate. European firms, while urging calm to avoid panic, are bracing for impact, particularly in automotive, pharmaceutical, and consumer industries. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz warned that Trump's tariffs would hit Europe's largest economy to the core, threatening thousands of jobs in Germany alone. Trump's reaction has been predictably fiery. In a Truth Social post just 2 hours ago, he called the EU's tariffs a declaration of economic war and vowed to make them pay a heavy price. He's hinted at tariffs as high as 200% on European pharmaceuticals and even suggested targeting EU digital services, a move that could hit tech giants like SAP and Spotify. This escalation comes after months of stalled talks, with Trump accusing the EU of negotiating in bad faith. Back in May, he threatened a 50% tariff on EU goods, only to pause it for 90 days to allow negotiations. The EU, for its part, delayed its own retaliatory tariffs on $24.5 billion in US goods, hoping for a deal. But with Trump's latest 30% tariff threat, that goodwill is evaporating fast. The global picture is just as grim. Trump's tariffs aren't limited to the EU. Last week, he announced 35% tariffs on Canadian goods, 30% on Mexican imports, and 25% on Japan and South Korea. He even struck a deal with Indonesia today, imposing a 19% tariff while touting it as a win for US trade. These moves are part of his broader campaign to shrink the US trade deficit, which hit $971 billion in 2024. But critics argue this strategy is backfiring. By targeting multiple trading partners, Trump risks isolating the U.S. economy, driving up costs for consumers, and disrupting global supply chains. Thailand, for instance, is now considering duty-free access for U.S. goods to avoid a 36% tariff Trump threatened. This global tariff blitz is creating a domino effect, with countries rerouting trade to dodge duties, a practice known as transshipping. American businesses are sounding the alarm. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce warned that the EU's tariffs, combined with Trump's levies, could cost U.S. exporters $100 billion annually. Small businesses, already stretched thin, face the brunt. Take a Kentucky bourbon distiller, with 30% EU tariffs. Their $50 bottle could jump to $65 in Europe, pricing them out of a key market. Manufacturers like Boeing, which exports $12 billion in aircraft to Europe, could see orders dry up as the EU's countermeasures target planes directly. Farmers, still recovering from China's 125% tariffs on U.S. soybeans, now face a new blow in Europe. The National Corn Growers Association reported a 7% drop in corn exports to the EU last year, and these tariffs could have that figure by 2026. On the European side, the stakes are just as high. The EU's $975.9 billion trade relationship with the US supports millions of jobs, from German automakers to Italian fashion houses. A 30% US tariff could slash EU exports by 20%, according to Goldman Sachs, costing the bloc $200 billion in economic output. Germany, the EU's economic powerhouse, is particularly vulnerable. Its automotive sector, which employs 800,000 workers, could lose $50 billion in US sales. Smaller economies like Ireland and Portugal face disruptions in pharmaceuticals and agriculture, respectively. The EU's response, targeting $84 billion in US goods, aims to hit where it hurts, but it risks escalating the conflict into a full-blown trade war. French Trade Minister Laurent Saint-Martin summed it up. This balance of power desired by Trump requires us to demonstrate our ability to fight back. What's next? The EU is playing a delicate game, suspending its initial $24.5 billion retaliatory tariffs to keep talks alive until August 1st. Ursula von der Leyen has emphasized necessary steps to protect EU interests, while Trade Commissioner Maros Šefčovič insists a deal is still possible. But with Trump's hardline stance, the odds of a breakthrough are slim. Economists warn that a 30% tariff could make transatlantic trade almost impossible, disrupting supply chains for everything from semiconductors to wine. The EU's proposed countermeasures, including tariffs on US aircraft and cars, could add $84 billion in costs for American exporters. If talks fail, the EU is prepared to go further, potentially targeting US tech firms with digital taxes. A move that could spark a broader economic conflict. For American consumers, the impact is already creeping in. Importers often pass tariff costs to buyers, meaning your grocery bill could rise. Avocados from Mexico, already hit by a 30% tariff threat, could jump 15% in price. A bottle of French wine might cost $10 more by September. Even tech gadgets, like German-made Siemens appliances, could see price hikes of 20 to 25%. The National Retail Federation estimates that Trump's tariffs could cost U.S. households $78 billion annually in purchasing power. Meanwhile, rural communities, especially in the Midwest, are bracing for another hit. Iowa farmers, already struggling with corn prices at $3.74 per bushel, could see export markets shrink further, pushing more family farms toward bankruptcy. The political fallout is just as messy. Trump's tariffs are a gamble to rally his base, painting him as a defender of American industry. But they're alienating allies and risking economic stability. The EU, meanwhile, is walking a tightrope between diplomacy and defiance. Von der Leyen's decision to delay retaliatory tariffs shows restraint, but domestic pressure from member states like Germany and France is mounting. If the EU pulls the trigger on its $84 billion counter-tariffs, it could spark a cycle of escalation that neither side can afford. Some analysts suggest Trump might back off, as he did in April when he paused a 50% tariff threat. But with his latest Truth Social rants, that seems unlikely. The global economy is at a crossroads. If the US and EU can't reach a deal by August 1st, the fallout could rival the trade wars of the 1930s, when tariffs deepened the Great Depression. Supply chains, already strained by post-COVID recovery, could buckle under new costs. Developing nations, reliant on US and EU trade, could face collateral damage. Thailand's move to offer duty-free access to US goods shows how smaller players are scrambling to avoid getting crushed. Even China, despite its own tariffs, is watching closely, ready to capitalize on any US-EU rift. The World Trade Organization estimates that a full-scale trade war could shave 2.5% off global GDP by 2027. Where does this leave us? The clock is ticking. The EU's countermeasures signal a willingness to fight, but they're also a plea for negotiation. Trump's hardball tactics might force concessions, but they're just as likely to backfire, costing American jobs and consumers billions. Farmers in Iowa, distillers in Kentucky, and manufacturers in Michigan are already feeling the squeeze. Across the Atlantic, European workers face the same uncertainty. This isn't just about tariffs, it's about the future of global trade, economic stability, and the livelihoods of millions. Will Washington and Brussels find a way to cool this escalating war? Or are we headed for an economic showdown that leaves everyone worse off? Comment below, because the next few weeks will shape not just the price of your groceries, but the paycheck of millions on both sides of the Atlantic. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell to never miss a beat.